Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined the Doctor as he travels the Vortex and arrive at episode number 288. You know, as they say, the story changes, but the ending stays the same. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How are you guys?
I'm tired.
Having a good 4th of July weekend?
It's not bad.
I am also tired and having a not bad 4th of July weekend.
I'm not tired. I'm not having a bad one either.
Why aren't you tired?
I don't know, just not. It's been a pretty... Well, a rainy weekend means a couch-bound weekend usually for me, so... haven't been doing much.
I spent Friday morning cleaning the gutters.
Oh!
Anticipating all the rain we were supposed to have this weekend that we didn't really get.
We got a lot overnight.
Well,
it was raining pretty
heavy overnight. It wasn't near as
near
bad as they were
no,
making it sound. We certainly never had any flash floods or anything like that. But no, today we went to my parents and we went and had dinner. They cooked out for us and we had fireworks. So we've just been doing fireworks almost all afternoon because, of course, I work tomorrow night. Keith does too. And so we won't be able to enjoy the 4th. But my sister and her kids, my mom and dad, and then us, my family, went over there. And we did day works, pretty much all early evening. And then in the evening we went and did the night stuff.
Cody doesn't like the fireworks.
Yeah, I wondered about that. You posted something about that on Facebook.
Although that picture was taken weeks and weeks ago.
Oh.
But yeah, he's not a big fan of the fireworks, unfortunately. And it looks like the block over is having quite the big party and shooting off really big fireworks.
Does he hide?
He just sticks really close to us. And we went to take him out to go to the bathroom, and he went out there, some went off, and he turned around and came right back inside. Nope, I'm done with this.
Nope.
He feels pretty safe inside. It's just going outside to go to the bathroom that he doesn't like. So we haven't done much 4th of July stuff.
Well, I'm tired because we actually, like you said, kind of a rainy day. We had TV time on the couch today, which was kind of nice. We watched Independence Day. And then... Fittingly. And then went and ran some errands, and then came back and watched Live Free or Die Hard, continuing with our 4th of July movie celebration. And then we've had both grandkids this weekend, so I'm exhausted.
That's exhausting.
I cannot keep up with them.
I watched Steve Jobs.
How was it?
It was good.
He's dead. How did you watch him?
Well, it was kind of creepy.
Webcam in the coffin. Oh, I think I'm going to do that. I want a webcam in my coffin so you guys can watch me decompose.
The movie's good.
Thank you for steering us away from that.
It's done completely different than I expected.
I'm just kidding. I plan to live forever.
It's tent-poled.
In that case, I'm not watching.
Help, let me out of this box.
It's tent-poled around 3 different product announcements. The first being the Mac, the second being the Next, and the third being the iMac. I highly recommend it.
I watched. I just finished the Let's Infiltrate the bounty hunter group that's going to try and assassinate Chancellor Palpatine story arc from Clone Wars.
Oh.
So I finished all of those.
I finished Clone Wars.
Me too.
We're done.
Sorry. Well, done with all the fully produced episodes.
Yeah.
This doesn't come out until Tuesday. Have you seen that one? The In-Laws, which is one of my favorite movies, and they're releasing a Criterion edition, and now I'm kind of all excited and thinking that I may actually need to upgrade, even though I already own it. It's Peter Falk and Alan Alda. Alan Alda is a dentist, and their kids are getting married, but Peter Falk's character's out of the country most of the time, and they haven't had a chance to meet until the weekend of the wedding. And Peter Falk shows up at the office and asks him for a favor that apparently he needs him to go. He says, "What do you need?" He says, "I need you to go into my office and break into my safe." Because there's a couple of guys standing outside that may or may not need to see me with this black bag, and I need what's in the... I just need it. It's industrial espionage kind of stuff. As it unspools, it turns out that Peter Falk may or may not be in the employee of the CIA, and may or may not, on the orders of the CIA, have instigated and committed a robbery against the U.S. Treasury and stole a bunch of bank plates. Alan Arkin finds all this out as people are shooting at him through the movie. But I made Mel watch it, and she enjoyed it. So
That's good.
I watched Zootopia this week.
So did we.
what'd you guys think?
That's good. It's
That was
good.
good.
It's one of the better Disney films, I think. I also watched Richard III, the Laurence Olivier helmed one.
Were you inspired a little bit
Yeah,
this week?
I was very much so. Because I hadn't seen Richard III probably since I was in high school, and this is the one we watched. But I remember sleeping through most of it. So I thought, well, this is the only one that was available streaming anywhere. I thought, well, I was riveted to it. It's really, really good.
I really...
Oh my gosh,
if
it's got Patrick Troughton in it, too.
Really?
Yeah, he plays...
Has he got a larger part in it than Sinbad?
Nope, it's a much smaller than him. He's Lord Tyrell. He's the one that knocks off Duke of Buckingham.
Spoilers.
And I watched a documentary called The Secrets, Richard III, and it chronicles the unearthing of Richard's remains in the parking lot, underneath the parking lot. It is quite interesting. And then doing all the carbon dating, going through and verifying that it's actually Richard. So that was interesting too. What else did I watch?
You watched lots of stuff.
You did
this
watch
week.
lots
Watched
of stuff this week.
Billy Connolly's Route 66, which I think I've said it on the podcast before.
You love Billy Connolly.
I do love Billy Connolly. One of my bucket list items is to go to Chicago and drive the Route 66 as much as you still can, all the way to the Santa Monica Pier, and that's what Billy does. He starts in Colorado and he rides a three-wheeled motorcycle, and he drives it all the way down. And they pick a few different locations to stop on the way and see, and it's quite interesting. It's on Acorn TV, and it's a 5-part, or is it 4-part? I think it's 5-part series, and it basically follows him all the way from Chicago to Santa Monica. The other thing I did was I finished the Early Adventures Second Doctor story, The Black Hole.
I started the second season of The Leftovers. Finally.
This is the one where everybody gets...
Yeah. It's just as weird as it ever
Raptured.
was. And we're almost done with season 4 of Orphan Black. We got 2 more episodes to go. We've been mainlining
Oh,
that.
you've been blowing through that.
Yeah.
Let's move on to news.
Okay. Lethbridge Stewart line announced the next book because I just blanked on the title of the one that just came out. Showstoppers is out now, so we're looking now ahead towards book 3, which is The Grandfather Infestation, written by John Peel. For those who need to know who that name is, he has written a number of Doctor Who novels, including Time Worm Genesis,
Which I have read.
A Virgin Missing Adventure Evolution, a couple of 8th Doctor adventures, including The War of the Daleks and Legacy of the Daleks, and a couple of reference books. And he did a number of Target novelizations. So he's returning to the realm of Doctor Who. I have a synopsis. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
The late 1960s and pirate radio is at its height. Something stirs in the depths of the North Sea, and for Radio Crossbones, that means bad news. Lethbridge Stewart and his newly assembled 5th Operational Corps are called in to investigate after the pirate radio station is mysteriously taken off the air, and a nuclear submarine is lost with all hands.
Dun, dun, dun.
You're rating it again before you've read it?
No, I'm giving it that sounds like a surprise. I'm already...
Wait, that's either got to be the way we rate things, or it's got to be the way we do a cliffhanger on things. You can't have it both ways, Sean.
I'm already curious to know how a pirate radio station is impacting a nuclear submarine disappearance.
I love that it's a pirate radio station and it's called Crossbones.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
The cover looks like something could be returning also.
Yeah, I saw it, and I stared at it, and stared at it, and stared at it, and then decided I didn't want to know
All right. We'll just leave it there.
what maybe it was.
That way you can be surprised if it is what...
Excuse me. Yeah, realistically from that, it could be several things.
Yeah. It's inspired somewhat by the plant horror stories made popular by the likes of John Wyndham. Author who wrote the sequel to Day of the Triffids gave a little snippet.
Wait, there's a sequel to Day of the Triffids?
Written by Simon Clark,
I did not know that.
who wrote the foreword to this book. So that's coming out in this month, July.
So Showstoppers was the June book.
Apparently.
And
Apparently
Grandfather
we got...
Space Station.
Technically we got... When did Moonblink come out? Wasn't that technically was that was in
April?
end of May.
Oh, it was, yeah. Well,
It was a delayed. It was a delayed release.
Oh, yeah. Was it end of May though?
I thought so. Maybe mid-May.
Mid-May, I think.
Didn't seem like it was that long ago.
We didn't review it too long ago, and we reviewed it a week or so after. So,
anyways, that's that bit of news.
Looking forward to having that one on the schedule.
And then some convention news. I don't know why I said that so weird.
Maybe you're more tired than you think you are.
Maybe. I think I started to say con news and decided to say convention, and that's why.
Some convention news.
Time Eddie has announced that they're going to attempt the Guinness World Record for largest gathering of people dressed as Doctor Who characters.
Yay!
So get your costumes ready. October 14th through 16th. So the number they need to break, is, trying to pull it up here, where'd it go?
I thought surprisingly low, quite honestly, when I read that.
493.
Is that a world record, or is that a
Guinness World Record?
The previous record was set in March in Mexico City.
I appreciate what was for the Doctor Who tour. I remember when they did that. I appreciate their ambition and I wonder if it's so low because Mexico was the first one to even try it.
This is the second.
Is it a new thing?
There's probably been conventions that have had well more than that. I mean, I think we've seen more than that at Gallifrey the years we've been out there. I just don't think anybody's ever certified it. So I think it's one of those maybe attainable. I think it's kind of ambitious for the convention that Time Eddie is, but
it's totally doable. I think it's attainable, Glenn. I think you're.
I
think you're being a negative Nelly.
I hope they do. I just think it's.
I don't think it'll stand long if they get it. I think once people realize that's the thing, Galley and Chicago TARDIS, they'll all go, oh, well, all right.
Right.
But good on Time Eddie for being the head of the curve, too. Speaking of Galley, they finally announced some first guests, Sean.
They did. These are all slated for next year in 2017 in February. And the roster includes some of the stalwarts regulars that you would expect: Richard Dennick, Jason Hangallery, and Gary Russell, and Paul Cornell, Nicholas Pegg, and Barnaby Edwards, Nicholas Briggs, etc., etc., etc. Some of the, I think, a little more exciting news, standout ones, are Michael Troughton, Daphne Ashbrook, of course, Philip Hinchcliffe will be returning, Peter Purvis, Annika Wilkes, Katie Manning, William Russell, Louise Jameson, Paul McGann, and Lala Ward. Lala is making her... Where did I read this?
Second American
Her
Doctor Who.
last appearance in North America was 21 years ago.
Wow.
She also is the final principal living cast member of the classic series that Gallifrey 1 hadn't yet hosted. So this is her first galley.
Wow.
And the last of the classic series guests that
Had Tom been there a long time ago, I guess?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. The way that
If she's the last of the
reads.
classics, then
Yeah.
Tom must have been there in the early days. Back when he would take a boat across the seas.
Must have been. I hadn't thought of that. So, I'm bummed because I would jump on an airplane today for Lala Ward.
For those of you lucky enough to get tickets, I'm jealous. Oh, shall we move on to feedback?
Yes, let's.
First up in feedback is Holly. Holly writes, The Kingmaker. Hey guys, hope everyone had a great week. Bit of housekeeping. The July book for the Doctor Who Traveling the Vortex book club on Goodreads is Moonblink by Sadie Miller. For those who have just joined the book club, if you have read any of the earlier books that the book club has read, please feel free to add your thoughts in there too. The Kingmaker. I've forgotten how much I like Erimem. She, the Fifth Doctor, and Peri play well off each other. Plus, Erimem breaking the one gentleman's hand when he got a little a little too fresh with her, had me chuckling at Peri's reaction at Erimem's response. He has another chance. Love the fact that the Doctor is an author that has passed his deadline for a book. How does that one saying go? I love the sounds of deadlines as they go swishing by. I also think that the Doctor may want to distance himself from Shakespeare's works for a bit after how worked up he got in this audio. Really enjoyed this one. I'll wrap it up here. Like Okinawa forward... I think I was supposed to say looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts.
Autocorrect must have got it there.
Like Okinawa forward. Okay.
Darn you, autocorrect. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you, Holly. I guess I should probably go back, and I have not
Posted your thoughts.
my thoughts on the Goodreads.
You should.
I should. It's probably well, I'll have time coming up shortly. So
It's true.
all time enough at last.
Our next bit of feedback comes from Mitch.
Mitch writes, "History's a mess. Hey guys, after listening to the Kingmaker, I can only conclude that history, particularly Doctor Who history, is a mess. This story's ending doesn't really work with the Shakespeare Code, and the events are all over the place. I did find the premise interesting with the publishing robot and the series of children's books the Doctor wrote while working for UNIT. I enjoyed the 8th Doctor comic series, particularly the 12th Doctor and Clara making a cameo appearance at the end. When Josie mentioned them, I thought that would be it. I didn't expect to actually see them in the comic, but I'm glad we did. Also, writing this feedback made me realize that both these stories had some influence from a future incarnation of the Doctor. The Kingmaker had the 9th Doctor delivering letters, and the 8th Doctor comic miniseries was arranged by the 12th Doctor to help Josie. Mitch." And she also confirms that she does not have the sonic screwdriver remote control. Hasn't been able to justify spending that much money on it. So it's a good thing that Mitch won our Patreon raffle prize.
Congratulations.
And thanks for sending us your address, Mitch. Sean might have had it, but I don't think I did. So I have the prize, and I will be sending it to you shortly.
I did have it, and I don't know why, because I know we asked you for it, and that made sense to me at the time. Even though somewhere in my brain I knew that I had your address.
Well, you had to have it because you sent her the lottery ticket.
Yeah.
It's true. And she hasn't moved since then. So,
But for some reason, getting that to Keith was just like, no, that's an extra step. I don't know why. I have no excuse for my behavior.
Yeah, that's okay. Don't forget, you can also send us feedback by going to our website, travelingthevortex.com, and filling out the Send Us Feedback tab, or send us directly feedback at travelingthevortex.com. Or you can also reach out to us on Facebook, Traveling the Vortex, or on Twitter, at Travel Vortex. Much like, as I'm waiting for this to pull up, Andrew Coleman Francis has been joined us for Twitter, and Friday Night Who, and Daniel Martinez has been interacting with us on Twitter. So good to talk to you guys.
Welcome both of them.
Yeah. Shall we move on to our reviews? Our review.
Do we want to mention that?
We have decided that we're going to push off the 8th Doctor comic miniseries off until next week. We had some technical difficulties on our end, and some of us were not able to get it read. Not by lack of trying, but unfortunately, the technical Neanderthal ran into technology again this week. And,
why don't you just call me out there, Glenn?
He had issues.
I was quite happy with one of us had problems.
He literally had issues that we can verify because we saw it ourselves with our own eyes. So we're going to push those off to next week, which we also decided kind of fits nicely with the 2 8th Doctor stories that we're going to do with the from his second series in Big Finish. So
that's right.
That'll work out. I just thought it was ironic that the technical Neanderthal had technology was the...
I didn't think it was ironic at all. I thought it was just...
Par for the course.
I'm cursed. Cursed, I tell you. Heath, do you have a synopsis for the
Kingmaker? The Kingmaker. Doctor Who encounters one of the most notorious characters from the past as he journeys through time to solve the great historical mysteries. Not surprisingly, the Doctor becomes mixed up with Richard III himself as he tries to unravel the perplexing problem of who exactly killed the princes in the tower. Peri and Erimem also encounter a suspicious time traveler, someone from the Doctor's past, someone who shouldn't really be there at all. So who did murder the princes in the tower? Perhaps it's best not to ask a question like that. You might not like the answer.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, I'd give it a bigger one than that.
Okay, go for it.
This is probably one of my favorite Big Finish audios now. This ranks up there with Spare Parts. This ranks up there with Doctor Who and the Pirates. This ranks up there with all of the things that I've heaped mounds of praise on. This is right up there with all of those. This is such a well-written, well-thought-out farce, dark comedy, extreme drama, back to a dark comedy, and back to a farce. And it keeps you guessing the whole time. There's a lot of times you listen to Big Finish or any Doctor Who, and there is some amount of predictability to it. And every time you think you've got this figured out or you think it's going to be predictable, it takes a completely different direction. And I love that. Nev Fountain had such a wonderful time doing this, you can tell. And he had such a complex story that comes across simply. It's just, it lays itself out there and has so many facets, but all connects and makes sense and winds together, and I think it's a terrific story. It does have a couple of issues, but overall it is wonderful.
It's one of those complex storytelling not tropes, but device or style that could be really confusing, and this one isn't. I only had one moment where did I have something go wrong? Did I miss something? Because it was when Peri and Erimem are talking in like the first episode of all the stuff we saw, and I'm like, what stuff? What are they talking about? And I didn't realize it had kind of done a time jump, and I just kind of decided to go, oh, okay, we'll see if it sorts itself out, and it made sense by the time I got through it.
The interesting thing about it is every time I got confused or thought I had missed something, someone else brings up that, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And they go back and they let you in on it. It's almost like it's paced so that the listener gets to the point where they think, did I just miss something? And then it's laid out right there. It's like Nev knew, like he knew this is where somebody's going to have a question, so I'll bring it back and fill them in. And it does that every time. The only thing that I got really confused and I kept thinking, they've got to tell me about this robot prince. Why the heck are the princes robots? What is going on here? And they never came back to it. They never came back to it. And I kept thinking, when are you going to reveal what the heck was why did she think it was a robot? And when they get there, I was like, oh, you did not just go there. Especially when she's talking about what part fell off.
I thought, when it happened, I thought it was like a leg.
I did too, because they didn't go into any sort of detail.
No, they really didn't.
But when she starts getting...
Well, and the princes are the hook through the entire story from the beginning of they're the mystery, and so it's important that he does kind of leave that dangling and you wondering the entire time, because that gets you into the mystery of the story.
Sorry. Sorry.
You know what you said, right?
I know.
Okay.
Choice of words.
Or
perhaps
brilliant.
Welsh chosen choice of words. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's it was one of those storylines.
Sorry.
That I honestly kind of kept forgetting that there was the robot aspect of it until Peri kept bringing it up. I was more concerned of, well, who actually killed them, what happened to them, why are they not dead? Obviously, they're not in the tower and it becomes Peri and Erimem, so what really happened to them? There's so much mystery surrounding the princes that the robot aspect was just kind of another fold to it that sometimes I would remember and sometimes I wouldn't.
See, and it was forefront of my mind the whole time because they kept saying, well, and because of the time jumps, because we're going back and forth between 1484 and 1487.
1597?
No, 1597 is Shakespeare.
1483
and 1485. Because they kept going back and forth between those, I wasn't sure at what point we were experiencing the princes, except for we did know that the Doctor had seen them in 1845 early on because the girls go out and show them.
But then we later learn that's not.
We learned that it's not them. Yeah, but that's the beauty of it. So the robot thing is still foremost on my mind because I keep thinking, how do the robots play into this? Are the princes robots? Is there some sort of reason? Why did Peri freak out when something fell off? and then suddenly it's revealed to us later that Erimem and Peri are pretending to be the prince. It's just so wonderful.
I'll go one step further.
So I kept wondering robot until that's revealed, and then I'm like, well, and I forgot the robot and thought, well, what really happened to the princes, and if they're imposing or masquerading as them.
I'll go one step further with the large chunk of time that we're thinking that Mr. Satan is the master. Even though it was a little too heavy-handed, I bought into it.
I bought into it too. Absolutely.
And so now we've
Peri, boy, she was convinced right up until when she's doing the big reveal.
So we've got all of that happening, and coming right off the fact that we did the King's Demons for Friday Night Who, I thought the robot was Chameleon.
I thought the same thing.
I was like, maybe that's why.
At one point, I suspected that Chameleon was masquerading as the prince, one of the princes, Edward. And then at one point, I thought Chameleon must have been Mr. Satan and that somebody was mistaken that it wasn't the Master. But then they kept going so heavy-handed with the Master. And then the Doctor, even at one point when it's revealed to him who it is, the Doctor seems certain, but he doesn't say it's the Master. But he seems certain enough that then I'm convinced again, well, if he knows who it is, it must be the Master. And it's not until it's
dark countenance dressed all in black. Oh,
yeah. But then when it's revealed later that he's Shakespeare, it's almost like that must have been who the Doctor suspected anyway. It wasn't that the Doctor thought it was the Master. He initially thought it must have been Shakespeare. Did you guys realize that Mr. Satan? It was spelled Seyton.
I didn't know that until now.
Yeah, I went to the wiki. I thought it was literally Satan.
We couldn't do that. That'd be too on point.
Well, the devil stuff at the beginning of it. That's why I thought he went with that name.
The interesting thing is that the Shakespeare aspect of it is really it's cloaked really well, even though it's very obvious when the Doctor's talking about to Peri and Erimem about how Shakespeare was there and they'd had some drinks and they had gotten into this heated discussion. And then when the Doctor leaves the TARDIS and Peri hears the TARDIS land again, it's right there. Shakespeare had been hiding out and had directed the TARDIS somehow and landed it in another part. So where Peri and Erimem were with it back. Obviously, he had a fast return switch or something. But.
Well, I got the impression based off the end conversation at the very, very end of the story that it was a happy accident that they wound up 2 years in the past, because the Doctor talks about it being
William Shakespeare had taken advantage of the fact that it not back.
Yeah.
You're right.
He didn't actually program the TARDIS to do that.
You're right. You're right.
I was led to believe that throughout the story until we got that explanation.
The communication between the Doctor in 1495 and the girls in 1493 was great. The idea of...
They even almost reference Back to the Future.
They really do. And I love the idea that it's the Ninth Doctor is kind of portrayed as the one that delivers the message back to the girls, because The guy specifically says a northern bloke with big ears, and it's clearly a reference to the Ninth Doctor, which makes sense that this would have been written that way because this came out in 2006, and of course the series had already been back on television.
Yeah.
So, and that would have been the Doctor at the time, so it worked out really well. I think one of the things that I am finding that I don't like is I think Erimem, and not to the fault of this story, but I find Erimem's character very uneven. In the sense that sometimes she's this kind of naive adventurer who is learning things and having her world open to her. And then there are some stories where she seems to be very close-minded and directed, and not in a bad way, but close-minded in the sense that she is a certain type of person because of the era she comes from. And then there's some times where she says she doesn't believe in gods, and then there's another time where she's talking about the afterlife. And so she seems to be almost written unevenly, and I don't know if that's to the error of the fact that no one really kind of outlined her as they handed these stories off to different authors. But so I'm having a difficult time enjoying Erimem as a character as we continue to do these. But that's neither here nor there for this story, because how she's written in this story works for the story.
And this story feels like she's made huge leaps in growth as a character.
I disagree. This almost feels like a slide back to me. It almost feels like Erimem of old, who was still set in her ways, had certain ideas of how things should be, and she hasn't. Because she felt like for a while there she was growing, but we did go through that part where she kind of quasi died and was being manipulated, and
I almost want to just discount that story altogether.
I almost want to too, but you can't. And now by putting that same type of Erimem in this story, it almost seems like, that's why I say I just think that I to no fault of any of the authors that have written these stories, other than I just don't think anybody was given any real true guidance with Erimem, and so I think that's just been the fault. The other thing that I find interesting that doesn't bother me is that Peri is written for somebody that should know Peri pretty well, because they actually are a couple in real life. Peri is written almost to the comic foil in this,
to some extent,
and it almost feels on the verge of unfair to the character, but again, Nev uses her in such a way that it works so well for the story that I'm so forgiving of her and of the way she acts and the way she's portrayed in this. But there's just that edge of she almost was. Her character's a bit cheapened in this, which I found surprising for coming from who it came from. But it works, and it works well for this story, so I'm a little forgiving on it as well.
Well, it's so interesting that there's so much of this where I was almost screaming at my iPod, Peri, come on, you know better than this.
Exactly. And
it almost felt like the role should have been swapped between her and Erimem.
Yeah.
And Erimem was the voice of reason through some of it, and it was like, what? No, what? No, that's not how this should work at all.
Yeah.
And then they would almost halfway through the story change stances, and it's like, what are you doing? It's
depending on what the circumstances were that required it. I mean, I didn't find it necessarily unusual that Erimem was saying, well,
we got to kill these.
We got to kill the kids. That doesn't necessarily strike me as out of place for her. Peri wanting to save them and being, we can change history. Is like, you should know better than that. No, you're not allowed to do that.
And you should know you're not allowed to do that, because especially, I mean, if you look at this from the television series, the two stories that's sandwiched between, Peri hadn't been traveling with the Doctor for very long. But now what we've done, as Sean was alluding to, driving a wedge into between two stories so that you can tell more Fifth Doctor and Peri stories, that this Peri should know better. This Peri has been on enough adventures with the Doctor to know, the consequences and the repercussions and things like that.
And I was okay with a lot of the Erimem stuff that you had issue with, Glenn, partially because the last story we had with her was Council of Nicaea, and that was such a religious-based story that it still felt in line with a lot of that for me. of what.
Yeah, but she was very counter to that religious ideals. That's the problem. She was very counter to what they were doing.
Well, she was counter to one group. She was still buying into somebody else's religious ideals and trying to push something forward. It was just two different aspects of religion.
She was buying into the countenance of why it needs to be one idea, not the idea of what they believed in.
Right.
So that's why I say when she starts talking about God and I'll see in the afterlife and things like that, that's a very Egyptian ideal, which I see where she's getting that from, but she's counter to saying that she believes in an afterlife or she believes in religion or gods, to turn around and say, Peri, I'll see you in the afterlife when we take the poison. So it's like, it was almost, there's just a little bit of unevenness, and it's not detrimental to the story at all, but it makes me wonder a little bit about
that whole scene. Just kind of put me on edge, and I wasn't a big fan of that.
I would agree.
Whole scene in general.
I would agree.
But the conversation she and the doctor had at the end about that was a nice little connection between the two of them.
Well, and I like that Erimem goes to the doctor later and has concerns about what she did, of deciding that they needed to go a certain direction and then telling, oh, Peri, I'm just kidding, And she's questioning her friendships again, which she had questioned her friendships based on experiences in the one where she had died, essentially, and she had the visions of Peri and the doctor and the differences that they had in those, and she was also questioning her relationship with Peri at that point. So it's kind of consistent with that, but it's peppered. I'm making too big a deal about Erimem here, I feel, but it's peppered throughout. But we have these moments of closeness, like the one in the space station where they were all buddy and great friends, and it just, I don't know, it just seems to be real uneven.
I agree. There is a lot of inconsistencies. This one, I didn't have as much problem with it as you did.
I really like the fact that Nev takes the... He almost skirts the idea of, in English history, Richard III has been so vilified because history is written by the winning side. And when the Tudors took over the throne and unseated the House of York, the king, Richard, was vilified, and the Tudors kind of set up their own history. And so anything that was chronicled back then was through the lineage of the Tudors. So we don't know for sure what kind of character Richard was, because there's not a lot of evidence that isn't biased. And it doesn't help that, and I don't want to come down on any side of who's right and who's wrong on this, because I don't want to offend anybody, because I think there are still a lot of people, especially in England, that have very strong feelings towards one way or the other, Richard or not, as we talked about earlier about the Richard III Society, and then obviously people that are adherers to the Queen Elizabeth. However, that being said, Nev kind of takes this middle ground where he doesn't make Richard this tyrant, but he also doesn't make Richard the hero.
No.
And I like how he takes this almost picture of Richard that nobody even expects. He's kind of this unreluctant king, but will do anything necessary so that it makes him look tyrannical in certain views or aspects.
Well, and he's willing to do things unsavory if he has
exactly
to.
If it's for the best of his people, which I like, because any king, I think, should take that approach. And so what I like is
and he's willing to go to great lengths to protect his family.
What I like is that the Duke of Clarence, who is Clary in this, in the original Richard story, the idea was that Richard killed his brother, who was the Duke of Clarence. Yeah. And the funny thing is, he if you believe the Shakespeare account, he had assassins drown him in a vat of wine. And I love that Nev took the parallel of somebody being drowned in alcohol as he becomes an innkeeper
a barkeep
who basically is drowning in alcohol always because he's always drunk, and he's always drowning himself in alcohol in the sense that he drinks too much, so much to the exception that he passes out often, and the girls have to like put him to bed, you know?
Yeah.
So I like how he's turned that on its ear, and he's kind of taken a parallel, but Clarence lived, but the impression was that the Duke had died, that he'd been killed, and Richard even allows people to believe that he's the one that killed him. Mm-hmm. I like the relationship between Richard and the Duke of Buckingham here as well, because it does parallel the story in the sense that the Duke of Buckingham did turn on King Richard, and Richard, in as history as we know it, had the Buckingham beheaded later, because they were, in the traditional story, they kind of partnered in this overthrow of Edward. After Edward IV died, Edward V was to take the crown. The princes were put in the Tower. Richard was granted Lord Protector of England by his brother Edward IV. Edward dies, the princes disappear, and Richard is accelerated to the throne. And the historical record of that as we know it is that Buckingham had something to do with that. And so they still continue to go down that course. But it's when they introduce the idea, which I thought it was also interesting, that Richard wasn't just visited by Shakespeare. He obviously had this idea that he was going to be a tyrant and knew his future planted in his mind by other time travelers that had come back to find out what Richard was really like.
Yeah.
And so he already had this presupposed idea of what he was supposed to be because it was already fed to him. And so I thought that was interesting, and that was why he kind of took the approach to things that he did, because he said, if I'm to go die on the Battle of Boswick, what's the name of the field? Bostwick Field? What, I had notes. I forgot to bring them tonight. Anyway, the battle that he's supposed to die on, he was going to go and accept that death on the battlefield to the hands of Henry Tudor's army. And so I like the idea that he's pretty much presupposed to this, and Nev gets him a way out by swapping Shakespeare, inadvertently swapping Shakespeare, and Richard living out Shakespeare's life as well. That was very clever.
It was clever, but I had issue with the fact that they swapped them, and I really like the reference at the end. I know a guy who can, or what, the name drop of whoever it was that can help you with some of the scripts if you need be.
Yeah,
because that's kind of the the
Bacon.
Francis Bacon.
Bacon.
Yeah,
which Bacon allegedly helped him with Henry VIII Part 3, allegedly, in history as well. So that was a nod to that as well.
But, so I while I liked that and enjoyed that, I had some issue, especially now looking more at the dates, of how Shakespeare could have died back in. And
it doesn't work with the Shakespeare Code, and I think Mitch was pointing this out to us, because Shakespeare and Richard are taken back to 1597, which is where they end up swapping, and Shakespeare goes back and takes Richard's place in 1485, and Richard lives out his life as William Shakespeare from 1597 onward, or 1595 onward. Unfortunately, Shakespeare Code takes place in 1599, when Martha and the 10th Doctor go back. So that would have, in fact, been Richard instead of actually Shakespeare, and the 10th Doctor should have known that or recognized that. So you cannot rectify that in that sense. Unless you somehow can accept that this might have caused an alternate timeline in which when the Doctor went forward, he stayed on one timeline where this never happened to Shakespeare, and he continued on and was actually a pretty decent guy instead of this jerk that he is in this story. But the other thing that is interesting is this also ties back to they've encountered, the 8th Doctor later encounters a young William Shakespeare in Time of the Daleks, when Shakespeare is found to end up back in a time that is not his own either, and is I can't remember if he was foretelling things, inadvertently foretelling things that were, I think the Daleks took him back, didn't they? He was like a kitchen boy or something, and they find out that it's William, and then later on it's divulged that it's William Shakespeare, and he was out of time. He was in the wrong time.
See, what's funny is with things like this, when you do a time travel story that winds up setting up something that then completely tosses out continuity, regardless of whether or not Shakespeare Code was written with the intent of, oh, but you didn't take in a Big Finish story into account, But if this had been any other series, if this had been Star Trek, I'd be furious. I would be absolutely livid at the idea that somebody didn't do enough research to know that you can't do that because it doesn't work, and you have to fix this in Shakespeare Code. You got to change the date, or you got to make a reference to it, or give me something.
Well, unfortunately,
with Doctor Who, it's just like, I don't even think about it. It's just kind of a wibbly wobbly timey wimey. It just, things happen.
Yeah, and you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, because I mean, when the show itself contradicts itself, like in the TV show proper, sometimes we have those issues too between classic and new, or classic and classic sometimes. So it's kind of one of those things that you just kind of have to swallow and just, okay.
Well, the Doctor only had one granddaughter. He didn't have a granddaughter and a grandson, and they traveled with
Yeah,
him as
and
for
see,
comics' sake as well. But see, me in my mind, I always want it to fit in my head canon. And so I always have that little niggle at the back of my mind thinking, someday I'm going to figure out a way for this to work. And someday I will figure out a way for this Shakespeare dilemma to work as well.
Unfortunately, the bigger problem with the Shakespeare dilemma is you can't just shift Shakespeare Code, like assume they were wrong about the year because of the order of the plays he wrote, and there's no way
By
Love
this
Labor's
time,
Lost.
He had already written Richard III. And, Love Labor Lost.
That's the bigger issue here. Unless Big Finish needs to write a little mini story that picks up Shakespeare from the battlefield and takes him back to his proper time and swaps
just
Richard
before
back.
he dies.
Yeah. And
see, I don't want that either, because I like that Richard was able to.
Well,
Richard gets the short shrift here, no matter what happens. That's what ultimately is the neat thing about this is Richard was already predestined to do what he does, and what happened to him was happened to him. He was either going to be painted. Well, he was always going to be painted in the future in a poor light, despite how the outcome of this story is. And he's lived with that now. He's ready to accept that. Okay, this is just who I am. He turns on a dime. That's why Buckingham begins to distrust him, because Bucko, as he calls him, I love that too. Bucko starts to distrust him because of the change that he has and his attitude towards the princes. And I love that idea that that's the reason why that happened. On the flip side of that, it almost gives Richard a justification to give him a better life than what was already predestined for him, because we had people coming back and meddling with his life, just in the sense of telling him that this is what was going to happen to him. That's crappy. If somebody came to you and said, this is what's going to happen to you, and there's nothing you can do to change it, and then you're going to be vilified for it in the future. You're like, what can I do? The story changes, but the end remains the same, or stays the same. So, by doing that and being able to swap Shakespeare, who has been probably the worst enemy as far as the vilifying the legacy of Richard III, ends up having to swap, and he's the one that dies in the battlefield instead, I think is a very clever device. It's a very clever ploy here.
It's very clever and very poetic. And I like that. I like it in the context of the story. It's just the context of the bigger universe I have the issue with. Right. I loved how Richard was portrayed throughout the entire thing. There's not a moment in this where I feel like he did anything unjustified.
He's so fun to listen to as well.
Yeah.
He's not just well written. He's not just very accepting. He's not just he's when he's a villain, he's a fun villain. He's the kind of villain you hope for, quite honestly. Because it's like, more of this kind of thing. A guy who, makes no bones about it. Yes, I'm the villain of the piece. And would I torture a child? Yes, I would. If
I need to.
It's so refreshing that this is somebody who's not delusional about it in a way. That you're getting a very straightforward. Ta-da.
But there are still lines he would not cross, like killing his brother or any of those things.
Or the princess, for that matter. And in fact, going so far as having the girls dress up like them, because the other two girls aren't. They're working, and the connection. That's the other thing I thought was clever, is the fact that Nev rewrites history in the sense that Edward IV put off that his daughters were boys because he knew there was, once he had 3 girls in a row, he realized his chances of having a lineage were out. And so he puts on this ruse that these girls are actually little boys who, as they grow, it makes it harder and harder for them to pull off the fact that they're actually girls and not boys.
Well, I also like that Peri then goes, well, what's wrong with having a queen? Considering from our perspective, they've had queens now at this point.
Even in the
but from their perspective, they haven't.
Well, even in the House of Tudor and the lineage on that changes because Queen Elizabeth actually becomes the monarch at some point.
She's the first queen, right?
She's the second because Mary Queen of Scots was the first.
That's right. That's right. But that's still post.
Right, but that's all post Richard, and then I think it's Henry Tudor, who I think becomes Henry the VII. And then Henry VIII, obviously, and then and down the line. Henry VIII, I think, was Mary and Elizabeth's father. So it's not that far down the line. So, just
far
pretty
enough back
sure
in
I've
history
got that right.
society would not accept it.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on Richard III. I didn't go too much further beyond that. So. Unfortunately, all this is off the top of my head. Forgive me, anybody in England who's listening to this or anywhere in the UK that's listening to this.
I'd step in and correct you, but all I have going through my head the entire time you were talking is, I'm Henry VIII, I am Henry VIII. It's on a loop. It's just such an exceptionally written show. Now, not to say that it does not have a few flaws. Mainly, the very distracting nature of the voice cast.
I think that works to its advantage.
Well,
because King Richard should have been from the north.
He is from the north.
He's from the north. That's just his accent.
I mean nothing.
He was Duke of York, is what he was,
and
that is a northern territory.
Well, Gloucester, but
he was Duke of York. He was
Duke of Gloucester.
I'm sorry, he's Duke of Gloucester. He was Lord of the House of York, which was primarily from the north. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
I mean absolutely nothing against Stephen Beckett because he did a phenomenal job. And as I commented earlier, that Richard was so much fun to listen to. Mel listened to part of this with me, and she went, I think it's so weird that they got Christopher Eccleston to do this. I thought he didn't like, And the first thing I did, as soon as he started talking, and the cadence, the rhythm of his speech, he sounded like Christopher Eccleston. I went and looked it up. Christopher Eccleston's not in this episode. It was like, get out of town.
See, I didn't think he sounded like... He didn't have the same pitch that Eccleston has. He had the same cadence. He had the same accent. He had everything that Christopher Eccleston has, but it was at a different pitch.
I don't even think it was a different pitch.
I think Eccleston's pitch is just a tad higher than this guy's. And so immediately...
Okay, I would give you that, but I could also see Eccleston...
I kept hearing somebody trying to do the Ninth Doctor, is what it sounded like.
Oh, no, see, I went reverse with it. I can understand where you're coming from with a different pitch, but I can also come from it from the Eccleston steps up to the mic and then feels like he has to dramatically deliver the line, and it comes out differently than...
You know what it sounded like? It sounded like Nicholas Briggs doing the Ninth Doctor, as he did in the Destiny the Doctor story. So
I could see that a little bit.
That's how it came across to me, and I immediately knew it wasn't the same actor. However, I did a lot of times keep thinking, he sounds very much like the Ninth Doctor. But Sean, I think part of the reason why I think it's more forgiving is this story sets off as a farce, is what it does.
Yeah.
And it sets off from a farce from the whole perspective of taking a real world series of books, the Doctor Who discovers, and making it part of the story and the continuity, brilliant. Which I think, Nev was that was so clever. I keep praising you, Nev. If you ever listen to this was brilliant. I love this. You're such a great writer.
We'll tag him on Twitter later.
That being said, because it's a farce and it's set up as a farce, the voice of each character fits. Bucko is the perfect name for the Duke of Buckingham because he and Buckingham are caricatures of who they are, but we've already set off that this is a farce, all the way to the point of the Doctor relaying the conversation or the little feud that he had, the drunken feud, on ginger beer. It wasn't even alcohol; it was ginger beer. Don't give the Doctor ginger beer. The drunken discussion that he's had with William Shakespeare, calling Shakespeare a hack, and that he, and then the idea that the Doctor went to Shakespeare's time to get information on Richard III instead of just going to Richard III's time to get the research for this book that he's doing. For anybody that doesn't know, Doctor Who Discovers was a series of 6 books in the 1970s that are done from the perspective of the Fourth Doctor, and they are written for kids, and they are basically the Doctor explaining real world things to kids. They were educational books, and there was intended to be 11 of these books, but after 6 books they had kind of fallen off, and they didn't go on. So what Nev has done here is he has taken and he has put it in universe, and as soon as they start saying Doctor Who Discovers, I knew Sean's hackles went up. Went, whoa, there it is, Doctor Who, there it is. But I knew.
But then they fixed it.
But I knew that you were suddenly okay with it when the Doctor explains. Well, it was actually supposed to be the Doctor, who discovers, and then somebody dropped the comma. And so I love that he did an in-universe explanation for that, and then I love that he had toyed with the idea. And these were being written when he was the Fourth Doctor. It wasn't until the Fifth Doctor that decided to do. Mysteries of History. I think, what was it called? History's Mysteries or something like that. Doctor Who Discovers Mysteries of History or something like that. Historical Mysteries, that's what it was. Doctor Who Discovers Historical Mysteries. And that he picks this idea back up because he's got this assassin robot from the publisher who has taken over all publishing in the 63rd century. In order to make their deadlines, they come back and they make sure that they turn in their works, and he keeps thwarting this assassin robot each time because I keep saying assassin. He was either going to have to give him the material or he was going to be killed. But
I don't know if it's because of the deadline quote that Holly referenced, but it felt very Douglas Adams to me. The whole idea of these robot editors sent back to make sure you finish your deadline just totally felt Douglas Adams.
The whole concept of the setup is 3 shades of genius beyond what I think we've had in anything remotely recently. Okay, so just as he's telling the story, all the publishing houses were eventually bought out by one gigantic conglomerate. We're not that far away from that now.
True.
Although he does pinpoint it down to the 63rd century.
Yeah.
So.
But
yes.
Maybe a couple of these hang on for a while. But so then, okay, Droid comes back and it's going to make you do your deadlines. That's great. That's just a genius. And then working in the Doctor Who Discovers, which I didn't know was a thing until I went back and looked it up later and went, oh, that was an actual thing. I suspected it probably was, just the way they were talking about it. But even if it hadn't been, even if it was just a totally made-up thing,
it's still clever.
It's still clever and awesome and brilliant.
The neat thing, too, let me do an aside here, is on the cover of the CD from Big Finish, the Fifth Doctor has one of the books in his pocket, and it's literally fashioned after one of the covers of the Doctor Who Discovers.
It looks a bit like a Target novelization.
And it's got the diamond logo on it and everything. And Target was the publisher of Doctor Who Discovers.
I liked the fact that he was so... In very Fifth Doctor fashion, after retroactively retconning this for a time crash, when he's like, well, I go zooming around the universe and being kind of magnificent, that he's still kind of blasé and yet still egocentric enough to go, well, I had made quite the name for myself. Maybe it was the Loch Ness Monster swimming up the Thames. It became a thing, and I had to do this, and had these stories, and I thought, well, okay, I'll be a writer. And you can tell that he's doing it with this air of humility, and yet not. It's just such a Peter Davison way of delivering.
That's the thing is, it works for the Fifth Doctor, because all of these were being done even this one had started when he was still in his fourth incarnation, which is completely Fourth Doctor. That's completely something the Fourth Doctor would, I should write these books because of this. But now the Doctor's gone through a personality change. And so he is that very kind of an air of disdain of, all right, I got to kind of finish this because I got this started when I was somebody else. And even the idea of bringing up the audio recording of him making notes. And I got to say, Keith, I'll call him out on this. He thought that was Tom.
I thought it was Tom.
You did too. The only reason I knew it wasn't is because I knew Tom hadn't signed with Big Finish until like 2012.
My first thought
and this was 2016 or 2006.
I didn't know when this was recorded. My first thought was, my God, that sounds like Tom. But I also thought that sounded like Eccleston, and it wasn't him. So then I went back and looked it up again, and Tom's not in this. And then I thought to myself, I wonder if this is the guy that sounds like Tom.
It is. It's John Coleshaw, and he used to do a lot of Tom Baker impersonation. Well, Fourth Doctor impersonations, and they got him to do this. But they also double billed him because he's also he's also Earl Rivers in this as well. So he got to play another part as well. So
my God, he sounds like Tom.
Yeah, when he does it. Now I have heard him do Tom Baker impressions and he's not quite there. It's almost like this guy doing what sounds like the Ninth Doctor. It's just enough off not to know it's not.
And what's nice in this, Doctor, they put in the audio effects.
That's
so
what makes it work, is the fact that it's an audio recording, and it masks that problem that I've always had listening to him try to naturally do it. When you put it in an audio recording, as Keith just said, it masks that idea and so you completely buy into the fact that that's the Fourth Doctor. It's so cleverly done.
Yeah. Yeah, the setup for this was just out of the park. And as it unspooled and went through its permeations, this is one of those great examples of I had no idea what was going on until the Doctor knew what was going on. You know, there was not a moment that I went, I know what's going to happen. Yeah. You know, I'm along for the ride, and I'm wrapped up in it. And the pacing was good. There was no point, maybe because it was farcical, there was at no point did I feel like, oh man, I still got another part to go, or this is the info dump, or I never had any of those moments during the story.
I'll go so far as to say
because a lot of it is info dumps. Technically,
I'll go so far as to say when this thing was over, I went, "It's over already?" No, I want more. Sometimes you trundle along to the end of a 2-hour Big Finish main range story. And you think, oh, we're reaching the end, thankfully. And that doesn't happen a lot, but it happens.
Sometimes.
And this one, I didn't even feel like 2 hours had gone by. We literally got to the end, and I could tell they were wrapping it up. I was going, no, this can't be the end. I want more of this.
And especially for being a historical. Now,
hang on. No. Listen, let me interject here. Something was bothering me last week. Something was bothering me, and I finally pinpointed what it was. And I'm as guilty as doing this as well. We had the discussion about historicals versus non-historicals, and we pinned last week's story as a historical, the Tom Baker story that we did, Mask of Mandragora. It is not a historical.
It's a period.
It is a period. A historical piece or a historical story has people from history and deals directly with events in history. That's what makes a Doctor Who historical. That's why the Gunfighters is a historical. That's why the Massacre is a historical. To a point, the Highlanders is a historical. So that's why a lot of those... Reign of Terror is a historical. Anytime that the Doctor goes into the past and we're introduced to completely different characters that could have been anything that happened, and it's just around the trappings of history.
It just happens to be in the past.
It just happens in the past. That is a period story, which they didn't do anymore until they got to Black Orchid. And that one is counted as a historical because there are historical figures in that. That's why they say there's such a break between the second Doctor's there. So even things like Time Warrior, when Sarah Jane and the Third Doctor go back in time to stop Link in the past, none of those characters were history-based characters. They were made up for that story, so it's not considered a story. So it wasn't until I was listening to this that it hit me why it kept bugging me last week that we were calling things historicals, and that was it. It was because they weren't historicals, they were period.
People in it.
But now, or even a real event. Like there has to have been a historical event happening, even if you created people for it, created characters for it. There's still, if there was an element of the past that was happening that we know that comes straight out of our history books, that would make it a historical.
Well, it wasn't one of the characters from Mandragora a real person?
Even the town was made up.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, it's period.
Yeah, it's all period.
But this is a historical.
This is historical. Yeah.
Ish.
So I will go to you. This is it is a historical because even
but it's
the,
a farce,
the gunfighters didn't happen the way the gunfighters happened. Doc Holliday was actually there. It wasn't the doctor mistaken as Doc Holliday. So even you could go so far as to say the Aztecs is almost a quasi-historical because
there's no way to know for sure.
Well, exactly, and they do use two of the characters in that story. The priest and the other guy, the two heavies in that, were actual characters from history. They did utilize those characters.
So, like Unicorn and the Wasp would be a historical. But the Fires of Pompeii would be a period, or is that because it's the event?
Pompeii is happening and the event is happening. I think you could place that in the historical. That's why I was saying if it's
people or event.
An event that's happening around it would be considered historical. And we do get more of those now. The one with Dickens.
I'm trying to think of one that's not.
The one with Dickens is a historical. The Shakespeare Code is a historical.
I suppose Empty Child, Dr. Dances would be a period. Well, no, because there's an event still going on.
But it would be a period because but even though it's set during the war, we don't know that bomb actually landed in front of that hospital. And those weren't real places. Those were made up.
Exactly. So that one would be period. But Victory of the Daleks, because Churchill's in it,
is a historical. Yeah.
Even though Churchill probably never employed a robot.
He would have if he had.
Well, that's true. He totally would have.
And he would have taken the TARDIS and utilized it for his own means.
Can you blame him?
So and also like Deep Breath would be a period.
Deep Breath would be period. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Crimson Aura, period.
Aura.
I got halfway there for you, Sean. Just give me that, okay?
If we get more historicals like this, I don't mean that. Maybe it's more if I don't like the periods more than the historicals, because I tend to like the historicals that have the historical celebrities in it. The ones that I don't know anything about, I don't tend to like as much, like Reign of Terror.
And that's almost. I don't mean that to be bad when it's even for historical, but for that reason, we tend to have that gut reaction to they're going to try and teach me something this week, And I'll admit, other than having seen Richard III with Ian McKellen, I know very little about the lineage, the history, the Tudors.
And he does a really good job of explaining it all for those who don't know the Richard III story.
See, I disagree. And the reason I say that is because this story did what the Doctor Who historicals of their time should have done. Should have been doing is I went back and I started researching Richard III to find out what happened, and so much so that I realized that he was vilified so much by Shakespeare. I'm going to go watch what Shakespeare did with the character. So it prompted me to go back and learn more about Richard. And actually what I did is I started this, realized how little of Richard I knew about Richard III that I knew about. I actually stopped, went and researched Richard III, made my notes, and did a mind map on it, so I knew what everything was and what everything was going on. Then went back and proceeded to listen to this. And then as Shakespeare showed up, I went, whoop, and I went and watched Richard III. And then I came back to this. So this actually did what historicals probably properly should do, is it taught me enough to be interested to go find out more about it.
And see, I would agree with that. I think a lot of times that I have that reaction to a Doctor Who historical or period because it doesn't give me that reaction. It's just it's set in that time frame, but not necessarily to the betterment of the story. This one did exactly what a historical ought to do, which is spawn you to go, oh yeah, I should look some of this stuff up, and you did. You carried through with it. I didn't, but I just. The
difference would be, though, is I came to Council of Nicaea knowing a good deal about the Council of Nicaea, and so that one was more of a refreshing. Okay, I understand this story from the perspective of what I know of the actual historical event.
And they've always done a good job. I never felt, aside from maybe Reign of Terror, that I entered a story.
You never feel lost.
Yeah. I still understand what's happening.
Agreed.
Some stories may inspire me to go look into or watch something else more so than others, but...
And part of that may be the time period in history, too, or the event that they're visiting. I mean, if the Doctor if we ever got the story of him actually landing or voyaging on the Titanic, I would probably be a little more interested in that event. I'm very interested in the book that's set around the Kennedy assassination, because those are moments in history that I have a personal affinity for and I'm a little more interested in. English history in regards of who succeeded the throne, which Big Finish seems like spends a lot of time with. That we've had several of these well,
that's because that's to us, it's the Old West, it's the Kennedy assassination, it's that we have a young history and we're familiar with certain things. They have a rather older history and they're more familiar with those sorts.
Yeah, no, and it's completely justifiable.
That stuff as much either.
Yeah, it's completely justifiable, but you could make the argument that an English company doing an English version of an English TV show dealing with English history, you're going to run into that a little more frequently than something else.
Because when they do something like the Gunfighters, then they get it way wrong.
Well, I like the fact that Peri also kind of had a reference of, I'm American, I don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
How would I know?
Which I thought, that was one of the other things that I felt like Peri is, while I felt like she was treated unfairly in the story, I wasn't bothered by the fact that they took the very American approach that we just don't know this. Because I appreciated that, because I thought, I wouldn't have either.
Yeah,
I'd have been in Perry's
absolutely.
shoes. I'd have been, I don't know. I know that Richard III was a bad guy. I knew vaguely about the Princess in the Tower. That was pretty much it.
I know there were two other Richards. Other than what they told me, that's all I knew.
Context. I think Richard III was a context clue.
Yeah.
Why do they call him Richard III? Well.
Anyway, that being said, I can't praise this story more because I enjoyed it. I had so much fun with it, and I felt like I learned a lot because of it.
Yeah.
So
this is one of the
just an aside. Sorry. The Kingmaker, which I thought was very interesting, that this is called the Kingmaker, and it's simply only the tavern.
Right.
The name of the tavern. But because the Kingmaker is the idea of the crafting of King Richard becoming the king, the cool thing about this, too, is what's not alluded to in this is there was a man named Richard Neville. I hope I'm getting this name right because I don't have my notes in front of me. Richard Neville, who Richard actually, as a young man, went and lived with, and that's where he met his wife, Anne Neville. And that man, Richard Neville, who was also the Duke of Winchester, they actually called him the Kingmaker because he taught people how to become knights, what the processes and procedures of becoming knights. And he groomed Richard to be a king long before Richard even suspected that he would become a king, or anybody knew that Richard would become the king, would eventually succeed the throne, or would eventually take the throne. And so that's where the name the Kingmaker comes from, but that character's not even used in this story, which I thought was a neat aside. Sorry.
Huh. Interesting. I was just going to say that this is just one of those, there are some Big Finish stories that you finish and you go, I don't know if I go back and re-listen to it. This one I definitely would.
Yeah, me too.
Totally.
In fact, I almost wanted to go back and re-listen to it again before we reviewed the story.
This is definitely,
but I made a bunch of notes and thought, I don't need to go back and listen to it, and then I forgot to bring my notes.
This is definitely a top-tier Fifth Doctor story.
Yeah.
This is a top-tier Big Finish story. I'll say that again. This is right up there with Spare Parts for me. I love this story.
It's top 10 for sure.
Yeah.
I'm exceedingly pleased with myself that I chose The King's Demons.
It fit really well thematically.
Fit really well thematically.
It did. And
not just the fact that they had King in the title.
I suppose the idea, though, that it also supplanted in our minds the idea that Chameleon might be involved and that the Master might be involved. And both of them are involved in the King's Demons. So that worked really well, too.
Yeah, well, I mean, it almost became more of a MacGuffin than anything else, but Maybe to the detriment of the story, because I was right there with Perry. Yeah, get him. It's him.
It's got to be the master.
No.
Let that William Shakespeare reveal be even bigger.
I know.
Because you're so invested in, it's the master. Of course it is.
I actually backed it up. As William Shakespeare. What? And I went back and listened to that again, like, I did not just hear that. Yes, I did. Okay, let's find out where we're going with this.
Perry's going to get her big moment and reveal that it's the master. Nope. Kudos. Big finish. Kudos, Nev Fountain. Good job. Good job. All right. What do we got coming up on the schedule?
Well, coming up next week on the schedule for Friday Night Who, Spearhead from Space. So a little Third Doctor action.
I actually get to pop my Blu-ray in. I bought the Blu-ray version of that, so I haven't had a chance to watch it yet.
Well, here's our opportunity. And then the show next week will be all Eighth Doctor stuff, because, of course, we've already reviewed Spearhead here in the proceedings, but we'll do Eighth Doctor Paul McGann in the Big Finish Eighth Doctor Audio Adventures Season 2, Episode number 3, Brave New Town, and number 4, Skull of Sobek. And we will cover the Titan Eighth Doctor miniseries, the 5 issues that were out. And I don't know, maybe I'll reread Mitch's feedback next week. Since
right, she did talk about
she did talk about them. So this is a refresher for everybody. We'll do that. And then may have a revised bit of scheduling from that point on, which we'll talk about off mic. So I'll leave you with that. You get 1 week.
All right. If you're already supporting us on Patreon, we certainly appreciate that. If not, why not? Go ahead and support us on Patreon, because all of the money that you put into that goes straight back into the show 100%. Everybody that is a supporter gets little special extras and gifts and surprises, and we hope to continue to do those here very soon again. Obviously, hold on to your raffle tickets, because we'll be doing another prize drawing soon. And if you aren't into supporting on Patreon and you have a little something you want to buy for yourself, whether it be through the Amazon store or buy as a gift for somebody else, we do have some links on our website, travelingthevortex.com. In the right-hand side of the page, there are links to Amazon. If you go through there, a portion of those proceeds go to us. And, of course, if you'd like to support the show outwardly and you'd like to buy some Traveling the Vortex merchandise, you can go to our Spreadshirt shop. There you'll find T-shirts and book bags and mugs and shot glasses and lots of fun things there. Not all of that, but a portion of that also goes into supporting the show as well. Anything else we need to discuss before we close this show out, guys?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
All right. Well, if that's going to do it for this week, until next week, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks
for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.